happy to see you all. I'll say that. So welcome to the Alta Mesa Center for the Arts June reading series. We're now a year into our program, and we're delighted this month, Pride Month, to host Tiff Dressen and Rachel Moritz. We've got not only just tremendous poets, but I think the audience looking around is quite remarkable too. So I'm happy to be here. Alta Mesa Center for the Arts is an interfaith arts and spirituality hub housed within and sponsored by Orinda Community Church. We believe that art is a spiritual act and a human right. We wish to provide a place where people from diverse traditions, artistic practices, and economic realities come together in community. We know that art can bridge divisions, substantive and arbitrary, that divide us. We come together not only to practice and to teach the arts, but to celebrate and learn from our differences and to foster lively and respectful interdisciplinary dialogues. We seek unity in diversity. Wherever you are on your artistic or your spiritual journey, for some of us, that's the same journey. Whoever you are, you're welcome here. So in 1969, police raided the Stonewall Inn, a haven for gay community in New York City. And they were met with a tremendous resistance that sparked the Gay Pride movement in city centers across the country. A year later, in 1970, on the anniversary of the Stonewall raid, the first Gay Pride parade was held, stretching 51 city blocks from 6th Avenue and Waverly Place to Sheep's Meadow and Central Park. The event was a loud declaration of a right to exist, to live, to love, and to be wholly human in the world. And we're thrilled today to celebrate Pride Month with two remarkable poets, Rachel Moritz and Tiff Dressen. Rachel's the author of Sweet Velocity, from Lost Roads Press, Borrowed Wave, and 5 poetry chapbooks. She's also edited a book called My Cesarean about mothers who experience C-section before and after that experience. Her work has appeared in the Academy of American Poets, Poem a Day, Colorado Review, among many other remarkable journals. She received the 2018 Best American Essay Notable Mention, as well as grants and residencies from the Minnesota Arts Board, the Jerome Foundation, and the Kimmel Harding Nelson Center for the Arts. She lives in Minneapolis with her partner and son, and that is where she's calling in today. So I'm very happy, and I'm looking forward to this reading very much. I love the book, and now we get to hear the author's voice, so it's a thrill.
Thank you so much, Mary. My goodness, thank you for that beautiful introduction and for hosting this reading. And I'm so thrilled to be here. Thank you so much, Tiff, for inviting me to read with you. I'm really excited to celebrate of Mineral and to get to share words with you. I was thinking that, I feel like part of finding your way in the poetry world, it's sort of like, you're entering a big orchestra and there's all these people playing different instruments and you're sort of trying to figure out what part of the orchestra you sit in. So it helps to find people who are playing their instrument in a similar way. And Tiff, I feel like your work has been that for me. And I just want to thank Elizabeth Robinson for introducing me to Tiff's work many years ago, and also for being such a supporter of so many of our voices. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to get to read. And happy Pride, all. I was thinking about the mission statement for your reading series, Art as a Spiritual Act and a Human Right, and it just feels so powerful to think about being in a space of care and community around language. Feels like an act of resistance that we're all kind of hungry for all the time in our current landscape. So thank you. I'm going to read from some old poems and then move forward in time. And I'm going to start with some poems from my book Borrowed Wave, where I was really kind of thinking through poetry making as spiritual practice, and also what it would be like to create a landscape filled with language that felt queered in various ways. So I'm just gonna read from some of the prose poems at the center of the book. And the first one's called Many Forms in Water May Also Be Found in Clouds. In the turning season, your one clay divided from hers, like swans riding a tourniquet of wind, winter's oriole cleft before a fallen oak whose breath is your only explanation, whose path yields the cabin door, hard of hand on burnished leaves, and whose water gathers from the pump, the dark maker, glued to a world your senses decided as when millions of years earlier, the silence of nature broke. The finished forms in the sand record movement that has ceased. I carried her through the woods, slept in waterlogged leaves with her body on my chest. Had I known I might translate the physical nature of love into language, my verb desiring the noun of her enough. Had I followed my act with a coal black comma, a reticent tapping on the plates of her skull, each slim erosion, she was then my prodigal daughter, the actual without faith. Flowing water encounters a widely submerged obstacle. As we were standing on the boundary, or as we were of that bald lineation, renaming our sound erupted from the lake, green as a lawn delivered wholly. How from moss-embalmed water we dragged its wild face on a path with both legs, synapse of boarding. How we carried the bell down irrevocable stairs, past our sentence of doubt and kept moving. Streams of air meeting at various angles. Little green plants held onto earth, a presence nearer than we knew or liked to imagine. As when I filmed the flowers up close, my hands induced their terrible shaking. My hands leaking on clothes pressed to my thighs, unmade, ungathered, just a few owned flowers and the mind's dissolution. That imagined space, I thought, while walking beyond the garden. Could it be held inside me even as I shifted form? I'm going to shift forward to some poems I wrote, or one poem I wrote when my son was very young, and might be evident in this words here. So this is called Near Future. Into the waver of new cherry trees, his plastic trowel face downward and stitched by wet dirt. The field of time, here it is. My fingers score their porous clay vessel, split at the base of a name. My acuity made into seal, dog, singing, then his stop, I don't want you. Mosquito's fine welt on his heel. He says, hello, how are you? Can I shake your fingers? The open boat of souls courses east to west and morning flares in, his face at my side. Why didn't you wake me to see stars? Don't stop, little wheel we fell into. Yogurt clings to his neck, hairline. Into the waver of cherry trees, we pull his red bike faster. Enters the singular, bright ambulance of love. I live in a very old house in Minneapolis that has terrible grading in its lawn. And we get a lot of storms in the Midwest, which are increasing as weather is getting wilder everywhere. So we have a window well that we periodically have to bail out. And this was written after one of those nights where you have to get in and kind of have a bucket. It doesn't happen very often. Not that you think I'm constantly spending my time bailing water, but this is called Rain, Flood, Father. Last night, standing in the window well, rain flashing what we thought was our roof line. Your shadow, roiled motion of shoulder and wrist, a bucket scraping gravel, and the child inside the yellow room who watches my body's gendered aging. I was like you, ghost parent in the back there time, dark against firebrand lightning, my soaked black sneakers in the grass, while rain rotted leaves from the river birch, plastered face of the season pouring from anthropogenic clouds. I was thinking about some of the poems of Mineral and how they're speaking to place and city and plant and body and animal. And so I just wanted to read from a series of poems where have been exploring place. I live in the Twin Cities. I've lived here all of my adult life, but I was born in Massachusetts and grew up with this sort of mythology of the transcendentalists and was very obsessed with Thoreau as a teenager. I think as many wannabe writers may be or may have been. And I also feel like I've lived in Minnesota for so long, knowing very little about its history and present as a Dakota place. And so fell into a rabbit hole of kind of research when I discovered that Thoreau had actually traveled out here the last year of his life, was kind of prescribed a health tour for the climate. He had TB and he traveled here at a time right before the US Dakota War, and actually ended up taking a steamboat cruise down to the reservation where many Dakota people were living, which was kind of a very strange tourist sightseeing project with all of these big, powerful white Minnesotans. Anyway, it's a rabbit hole of history I won't go into too much, but I wanted to kind of write towards, place, mythology, and whiteness in Minnesota in particular. So I'll just read from some poems from that series. If each American place is hoax, a mythic body in time, once rain streaks this sheet of open water, he swims across the morning as it rises toward today. Spandex of joggers, tinfoil cars on a parkway. This single oak may have seen him, large enough with wider arms. The boarding house where now lies a mansion, if its ice house kept our past intact until months of heat sugared the water. If already grain mills and lumbermen, if hackberry bore bits of lanceolate leaves, he climbed the hillside carrying pages of his journal, was written about for years by those who shared his love of what was once called nature or place. While the lake grew shallow, and this wild with much pink flowering he found on his western quest to cure disease of domestic variety. No longer does the apple tree grow east, daily searching for his specimen, to secure a plant book pressed of Latinate cursive. Found wild plums and raspberries, farmers piled in buckets their marshy shorelines, their long tap roots, succumb as he will to the death of fruit and of bark and fruiting orchards in grassy notation on a page. Each bird with its nest sake tremors a queer note, and steamboats go on parsing up the vein of woodlots, culled for empire. On a page, hearing woodpeckers tap some bog willow or arrowgrass taste sweet, some hickory or maple, with its fingerprint of ice. Once 200 species, lost already from this place, steam rising with our river's yellow foam, and I miss the old planet. Woke up one morning certain I could feel a shift. How snow doesn't taste the same, drier or wetter. Some white rose here, 6 feet high, an entire leafed spiked grass to examine wild plants, cared more for flora's weather than who it was lived here, though nothing unusual for the white time kept alive. Any latch to land a natural thing, but always this way of seeing through naming. And what was the orange-like plant, the bluff 400 feet before the town site's umber wing? Caught in the catalog of put out the Indian things, then pioneer, all the little house museums still string our warming century. I'm just gonna close with 2 poems in a similar vein. This one I wrote in the summer after George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis, and we were experiencing in the first weeks this influx of white supremacists into the city, which I think at the time it's really hard to articulate to people who weren't living here, that was really happening. And of course, it's happening over and over again in America. So again, just thinking about past and present and how they blur together. History poem. In today's explosions of present tense, our child stabs at clumps of wet soil to soot the garage facade, so paint flecks off, gray beneath the structure housing animal or carriage once too narrow for gas vehicles. It slants down our alleyway. I imagine as a package sold to an Eastern mail. When trails led to pasture and when pasture led to river, when grasses full of oxeye, sorrel, coneflower. We swept the bushes that summer for bombs, crouched in the dusk, dust graveled around ankles, and our neighbor who did not believe in white terrorism sat with his garage door half open, smoked in his lawn chair, big fang moon above. So I close with one poem called Poem for 2020. Flash of yellow year of aftermath, masked child face with ears tugged by lucid straps from the helmet for his bicycle and riding down the sidewalk to locate a body you love in despair time. Which one was it, safe or burned off from safety's embers? Down the palm of each day, we went on dwelling in our houses, a highway's throat crossing the same river, some parched grass with acorns in all the city parks, seeking comfort. The patrol car drove up the swell without trees, then veered away on the hill's dry time that would be burning elsewhere in this new age. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. That was remarkable. I'm here scribbling notes, so it's hard to go to a poetry reading without also scribbling notes, just usually my sign of a fabulous language. You can purchase Sweet Velocity. I put a link.
Mary, I think you might be muted.
But I just said brilliant things, really brilliant things. Okay. Thank you was the kind of the gist of it all. And it was wonderful and just great. I loved it when I am compelled to write lines down as I listen. I also said, please do purchase Sweet Velocity. I put a link in the chat over there on on mine, it's the right-hand side. And we'll have more time to speak with Rachel at the end. Tiff Dressen was born in St. Paul, Minneapolis. Their latest book on mineral, let's see if I can get this in the camera, from Night Books was just published in 2022. Songs from an Astral Bestiary from Lyric Press in 2014. It was their first full-length collection of poetry. They currently live in Oakland and work in the Office of Research at UC Berkeley. They enjoy spending time with their felines, urban flaneuring, setting type, and letterpress printing, along with many other crafts. Please help me in welcoming Tiff Dressen.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Rachel, for the incredibly beautiful reading. I'm so honored to be reading with, a kindred spirit. So I'm grateful. And thank you to both to you, Mary and Elizabeth, for inviting us and having this reading series. So I really appreciate your mission statement and all of the effort that you put into this and making it happen. So thank you very much for having us, and thank you for celebrating Pride Month. Like it's still so absolutely necessary to do. So I was going to start. I'm actually going to, somebody's having a party outside, so I'm going to shut my window. I was going to start by reading some poems from Of Mineral, and the first one in the book. And one of my fascinations has been to work with the form of the alphabet, and it would be what people might call an abecedary, where you use the alphabet as a kind of constraint. So oftentimes I will work on a poem that basically goes right through the alphabet from A to Z, first word starts with an A, second word starts with a B, etc. And then I'll, do these explorations where I sort of blow that up and explode it. And there are lots of these. There's actually 3 of these types of poems within the book, kind of bookmarked. It begins with an abecedary and ends with an abecedary. So I'm going to read the first one, which is a really, really old poem with a new title. So I'll just say that. Theirs. Anything but crinoline dressed estrogen fetish. God, how I just kissed lust, mistook nascent opulence, pissed queer resistance, stood tacit under violet wind chimes. X, yoked for 0 gravity. The next poem I'm going to read is it's a dedication. I think it's a dedication to San Francisco. I'll say that just in short. It's called A Letter in May from Portola, San Francisco. And it has many different, I will say there are many different quotes from other poets. So this has a quote from Beverly Dahlin's poem, A Letter at Easter to George Stanley. It has quotes from Robert Duncan as well, and then quotes from newspaper articles. So it's a kind of a conversation with all of these texts. A Letter in May from Portola, San Francisco. The city is a labyrinth. I walk. In my head, another poet repeats. There is no space left in America. There is only distance. Last night in corpse pose, I thought of the corpse flower, death camas, lily of the valley. This morning I dreamt a single many-petaled bloom emerged from my thigh. You wanted to name a new flower. The city is a labyrinth. I walk in my they body, anders als die anderen, past the International Church of the Four Square Gospel, up the water tower of the bee, whose flowers are flames lit to the lady, from the rabbi to herbalist, past the vanished consulate of Malta. The Avenue Theater marquee says, the little neighborhood that could. How do I create the distance you need to reach across? Looking out the bedroom window, I repeat after you. Pinus pinea, umbrella pine, Italian stone pine, parasol pine. I ask, how is it possible that we can see the Salesforce Tower from here? This morning I carried Burkett downstairs to her sunspot, her malleable feline creatureness, comfort and mass, the weight of those I love upon me. The city is a labyrinth. I walk in my invasive species body, where from the shadows that our forms fall, where people forget you in time. Itasca, Odessa, pushed up against Fleetwood, Travel Queen, this edge of reservoir. Underneath the Arbutus Unido, Irish strawberry tree, to the tragedy of vehicular homelessness, the cane apple. You are part of the city will forget. I've learned where to walk along the structural scars of a city, where from fall all architectures I am, awakened in subduction, zoned, lost under the 101, squatting in the skeletal greenhouse with phantom flower crops. It's still warmer here. The next poem I'll read is it's an homage to Frank O'Hara. Poem for April 2014, after Frank O'Hara. Afternoon light drops this blood orange flush window. It is late April and snowing still in the part of the world where I come from. Vascular roots of desire. What is the purpose of desire? Small animals live and die in the brushes nearby. I walk through the rosemary to smell the rosemary. I can't see your face anymore, where you should have been. I see peonies. I'm watching a film in my head I call, I don't know how to get from country discipline to territory surrender. Bleeding to death isn't so bad, is it? What if it all came out blue, like Persian indigo? Would that frighten you? And this next series of poems. So I seem to have this kind of penchant for writing poems on the Feast of the Epiphany, which is January 6th, which happens to be, I guess, traditionally, technically speaking, though my mother did not have this in mind, would be my feast day. So traditionally, females named Tiffany were born on January 6th, the Feast of the Epiphany. So I just, every Feast of the Epiphany, I write a poem. And so I'll start with two of those, and then I'll finish at the very end with the last one. Poem for Epiphany number 1. And this is after the poet John Wieners. I rest my head on the sundial. I know there are things for the sole purpose of forgetting. I forget them. Then patiently, finally, I was back on the vertical. I was blue smoke up the chimney apparition, rose paper, sandpiper. Please ignite a new structure for love. Why don't you? While you're at it, red and bright and holy, like the honey-tuned clockworks in your eyes, the day steals from me. And poem for Epiphany number 2 was written on January 6, 2021. And this also not only coincided with the attempt to overtake our government, was also the funeral of a beloved family member. So it was quite a day. And this is in memory of Justin Kane. I walk the first scars on snow, all the night bright over brittle. I am sky illiterate. That story in which she sold her hair. Magicians, star diviners, bird nests, naked, deciduous. I spent the night. Sugar pines drop, saying goodbye, the largest cones I can recall. He was gifted with animals, may have even spoken animal with his hands. I thought, if only I could see Saturn's rings. Okay. I'm gonna skip over. This is a poem called Earth's Body. Earth's Body. Could I not at random enter all? Enter you openly into herself or his self, or the mother and father of selves? Enter bedrock, the silvered edge of sibilance. The alluvial medium of me, the speech secreted. I close your eyes. I hear the colors of earth at large through exhaust pipes, through the precise ore picked from bone, or the wild root ascendant nearest me. We are the same lineage. Of the still warm oven bird picked from the sewer grate to carry in your cupped hands. Your offering, your metabolizing dream body that eats night air because it is a tangible thing. Of the words we found, they were light enough for tilling. Dissolving medium of me. Close your eyes. You are bleeding out into a bright helium night in which I tuned you, harpsichord by the sea. Be 1,000 sleeping fish. Be ink thrown under the hull. Be the fruit that ascends from the last tree you looked so intent at. We were denied the original forest that grew here. We claim space, light, water, and fail. Be the scarlet pollen and amber, the first thread coming out of the fleece trapped in vegetation. Be the threadbare resemblance, diluvial medium of me. A rain of forms comes over me. There are bones in the riverbed. You touch me where two rivulets meet. And then I'm going to read the last poem of the book, which is another epistolary, and it's kind of, I would say it's kind of more of a kind of explosion of that form of using the alphabet. And so there's a reference to the word Adam, which in this case, it's spelt on the page A-D, Adam, as in Adam and Eve. And this is after the poet Inger Christensen. Abecedary in four parts. 1. Alm's blood. Atom of iron melted once inside us. Cobalt bombs, salted earth. I watched dendritic elderflowers, psalm a path I call Fibonacci's grace. Because your teeth and bones once were coral, hydrocarbons in the ice age. 2. June nights, kingdom come, thy will be in the carboniferous forests, as in livestock melancholy, as in, quote, we might have hoped to find the animals in the sheds of a nation kneeling at midnight, quote. 3. Nova's optic nerve, somewhere in between, where plucked orange, spots, minerals in transit, nasturtium bright. 4. Can we predict quantum restitution? Call it karma. Call it my stolen tenderloin under the wire violet wound I was saving for another incarnation, anew. Zeno yearning zenith. And then I'm going to finish up with, so yesterday, a group of friends, my partner and I, Kate, and a group of friends did a long walk of San Francisco, which is one of my favorite things to do, is explore San Francisco on foot. And we started from the southern part of San Francisco, actually Daly City part. And we walked all the way through the sunset around Lake Merced and eventually ended up in Golden Gate Park, where we were very fortunate enough to catch, for this weekend only, they're displaying the AIDS memorial quilt in the park. And so we had a chance to walk through, spend some time walking down through the panels and just taking it all in. And I will just say that, like, I was telling somebody, it's like, there's no words I have to describe it. It was at once just beautiful and absolutely heartbreaking. And so I want to dedicate this next poem to all of those people we have lost to AIDS and who we continue to lose to AIDS, because AIDS is not over. And to the beloveds, the family and friends of those who have passed away from AIDS. So this is a relatively new poem. It's not in the book. I remember 1878 Market Street, after Joe Brainerd, and because there is no going back. I remember 1878 Market Street, room 303. I remember the billboard I lived behind, the city doves who nested in the crawl space. I remember the stainless steel sink into which one night I vomited whiskey and macaroni and cheese. The skylight that leaked holy water on my Sunday morning hair, sleeping with the floor on the nighttime chorus, F Market streetcar. I remember Mike, my first San Francisco friend, who left small gifts outside my door. The framed collage made from dryer lint entitled Bodhidharma's robe after numerous washings. I remember a boy named Bill who lived next door. I remember when he started asking to borrow money. I remember his overdose outside my door, the woman firefighter trying to revive him. I remember arriving in a May and departing in another. I remember ACT UP meetings in the basement. I remember Sunday afternoons at the Little Hollywood laundrette and the guy who cut out penises from Polaroids to make a penis collage while folding his delicates. I remember being aware of being cruised while being misgendered. I remember not caring. I remember Thursday, August 13th, 1998, Bay Area Reporter headline, "No obits," and thinking how writing an obituary could be an act of love. I remember Mike looking like a sagacious wire-haired terrier, his rediscovering vinyl, pouring his working under the table money into his sound system, knocking on my door every other day to come listen to each new, "Can you hear the difference?" I remember 1878 Market Street and the third floor shower, capacious and coronal throne room used for sex filming in the bygone Swedish part of town. I remember Mike sitting in Mike's room, eating frozen cherries from a jar and listening to And It Stoned Me, thinking Van Morrison was in the room. I remember 1878 Market Street, the older Queens calling it the Viking Hotel. I remember once in Muir Woods, Mike resting his cheek on a pad of wet moss. I remember when I started doing that in remembrance. And then the last poem I'm going to read is the last poem for Epiphany number 3. And this is dedicated to a beloved poet, Colleen Looking Bill. So, poem for Epiphany number 3 for Colleen Looking Bill. Ruby crowned kinglets dash and flit near our window. I watch the fiber optic angel of death. Yes, that's what you called it. Lowered to the sidewalk. Men in their buckets above yelp, stare at the sky. Message from a friend appears. I will always miss her, though now she feels far away in another part of the galaxy. I want to write a poem for the songbird fever dream set in tiger pose. Poem for the neutral eye of heaven. For the sun at 200 kilometers per second. Poem for the solar system orbiting the Milky Way every 230 million Earth years, pulling this poem along with it, singing the black bar below the wing bar, bringing myrrh to mortality, scented, olive green, carried in the claws. Thank you.
Tiff, thank you very much. Now we are open for questions, and I know you've got a lot, so you can do any of 2 ways. You can raise your hand, I can call on you, or you could pop one in the chat. Before we do, I had one question, and it comes off a line, I think, in one of the early poems Tiff read, and that created distance you need to reach across. And we were talking earlier about landscape and moving both chronologically and also geographically, cartography, through time. And I'm wondering if both of you, how you see a poem that creating distance over which a reader can enter an experience that otherwise could not be entered fully.
That's a great question.
And I mean, make of that what you want.
Great question.
You can answer whatever you want, but fascinated by that line and by the notion of both chronological time that makes distance and geographical time or geographical space that separates us. And how do we bridge that distance? And how do we create a distance so that we can turn and look anew at what we thought we knew?
Gosh, I feel like I want to sit with that question for a while, Mary, but I'll try because it's such a good one.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'll just say one thing, Mary, about it. Just that I think when I think about that, and maybe this is sort of applicable like to readers too, like the notion of creating distance in order to create desire, and creating desire as a sort of kind of motivation or energizing to reach across. There might be a way in which you make things, I don't know, I'm just freewheeling here. Creating a little bit of distance, creating some space that allows a reader to find their way to you. But it just doesn't bring the poem to them. They have to maybe have their own journey with the work in order to find their way to you. So that's kind of what I think about, sort of that my first thoughts on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes me think that, I always think that sometimes what I'm doing is creating like a still life that you step inside the frame and then you're just streaming in some kind of consciousness, which may be traveling through space, and space time you're always traveling those together. They're not separate axes. But there's something about that mixing of the abstracted frame and the intimacy of poetic voice and the way a poem just kind of, pulls you along line to line as if you can't stop until the poem puts you out again, that it feels like you're on a journey, that I think is both very intimate and also has some inherent distance to it, because that's how we, inhabit language, because words are both, abstract. They're not, they're not a rock. They're not a tree. They're something. They're mediating those poems. So there's something inherently a step removed. Yeah.
Lewis Hyde had something to say similar to that about having a balance between the abstract and the detailed, and that finding that balance is really the key to all kinds of writing, but probably also any kind of image making. What is the distance from which you view anything, and how can you relate it without being swept in to the emotion of the moment? Sarah has a hand up.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you both so much. I'm out and about, as you can see. I'm in Golden Gate Park, actually.
Oh, wow.
And thank you, Tiff, for the reminder about the quilt, because I knew it was coming and I didn't realize that it was leaving, and I'm like on my way there. Shut up. Wait, where is it exactly?
It's
you don't have to tell me that. I can look it up. But
yeah, Robin Williams. The Robin Williams shadow.
Okay.
And I think they start closing down, like they start folding it up around 5 o'clock. So if you have to like drop the phone and run, across the park, I totally understand.
I'm gonna make my way there as quickly as I can. But yeah, I also, this is a question for Tiff. I also identify as a flaneur of San Francisco. And it has been like such an important part of my spiritual life, and I guess my writing life, although the question I'm formulating is like how you functionally have written and walked. Like, do you do it simultaneously, or do you process and then write later? because for me, I know like when I'm on a walk and it feels so immersive in a way, it's like I don't want to stop it for anything. I don't want to take out a notebook. I just want to keep being like the eye, or like, yeah, feeling like I'm really there and not even making anything, but just absorbing. So I'm curious how you do that.
Yeah, like, well, thank you, Sarah, for that question. I'm glad to see you out and about. Yeah, I also, I am really immersed. When I'm on a walk, I'm really immersed in my environment. And so I think it's kind of when sort of when I have the like luxury and privilege, really, sometimes it's really a privilege to have the time to do that, to be fully immersed in one's environment. And then I started especially during the pandemic, but even leading up to the pandemic, I had a pretty regular practice, and still do, of journaling. And so I would maybe, when I was finished with the walk, I would journal my thoughts about it. And I would say that a lot of poems really start like from those like seeds from journal entries. So I tend not to, like, when I'm walking, when I'm in the zone. Also sometimes I'm going through neighborhoods that I really need to be aware of where I'm at. You know, I try to go to, like, you know, there isn't any neighborhood that's off limits for me, which means that I have to be completely in the moment to keep myself safe too. But anyway, I hope you get to the memorial quilt. It takes them a while to take it down, so to fold it up. But thank you for that.
This is a question from Juliet, who's wrangling her son at the moment. She says, questions for the writers. I loved what you both said about time, space, etc. I'm interested to hear you both talk about the sonic value of the language you choose. Thank you, Juliet.
Great. That's a great question and a great observation. Do you want to start, Rachel?
Yeah, you know, I feel like I write in a kind of trance state. So it's like the sonic value is, I mean, I feel like I just write through sound, and often it takes so much stepping back from the poems to really hear, like, you know, have I created only this, you know, am I only working in sound and it makes no sense? So there's always, for me, this, you know, process of being fully immersed in the soundscape, and then, you know, having to kind of step back in the editing process, I guess. And I think that the listening feels to me like listening to this sort of oracular experience, or just tuning into the sound that I don't always know where it's coming from, but it has to do with the form of the poem and the subject I'm working with, I guess. So yeah, it feels like it's a big part of the creation of the work. How about you, Tiff?
Yeah, thanks for that, Rachel. I think in some ways we're sort of similar in our sort of mode. I can totally identify with the trance-like state. And I think I do. For me, a poem just has to sound right. It just has to sound right. And I don't really know. It's like I don't know what it's going to be, or I don't know what it should be until I hear it, until I say, you know, I say it out loud, and then it sounds right. But I'll add to that, like, it has been more recently when I've been paying attention to just more of like what kind of vocalizations are happening around me in my environment, whether they're animal, you know, bird, cat, coyote, dog, and also like just the sound of like the trees, and the sound of the backyard, and the sound of the sort of mix of urban and sort of, you know, wild landscape that you know, I find myself moving in and out of. as well as just what people are saying, what's happening, what I'm hearing on the street, what I'm hearing on the bus, what I'm hearing on BART. All of those things are sort of moving through me, and I'm acknowledging and taking all of that in. I feel like that's all like me being like part of my job, is just to be an aware human in the world and be aware of maybe the person sitting next to me is really having a bad day, and they may be saying something about that. And I'm listening and I'm paying attention. And maybe even talking to them if they engage me. So I think it's also been sort of since the pandemic, I've been more acutely aware of that, because you just sense how isolated and how in such pain people have been, like experiencing isolation and that kind of lack of like human, like being around human voices. And so I find often that I'm kind of craving it, even if it's just, what I hear as I'm just running down to the train to catch a train, So anyway, thank you for that question, Juliet.
Any other questions? I had a question relating to the practice of setting type and how that very meticulous process invades this trance-like state and gives it order or limits it, or do you see how the type is set before you set the poem down by hand, or how does that practice influence the way in which you create a poem? And Rachel too, the spatial arrangement of the words on the page is key. How does that come to be?
Mm.
Such good questions, Mary.
Well, I mean, I've had a bit of a break from sort of typesetting and letterpress printing just because of the pandemic. That I think that like when you're setting type, you have to be aware of every single space and every space between words. And sometimes you might get a tray, all the type comes in a tray, the type of font and the size of it. And sometimes there'll be like, people don't put things back together. I'm going to be very practical here. Sometimes people don't put their letters back in the right place. And so you can have a tray and you'll be setting type and you'll get all kinds of interesting, like the T, that is not a Garamond 12 T, that is a Baskerville T. And so it is a kind of like acute awareness of every single mark you put on the page. And so oftentimes, I will have a friend ask me, well, can you typeset this for me and print it? And they'll send me like a really, really long poem. And part of me is like, oh my God, I can't, that's exhausting. So there's a kind of like, is a sort of maybe you want to make every word and every space count. And so there is this sort of like tendency to want to like set things that are like more condensed or smaller, or just have fewer words. Then that's just from my perspective, and that could be like, I'm a lazy typesetter, right? But it is an absolute acute awareness of everything. Even you have to get out the magnifying glass and just like see if you have like every letter is in like the same font, the same typeface.
And backwards too, right?
And backwards. Well, you're upside down and backwards. Yeah. Right. So it does when you're actually setting it up to print. It's you're setting, backwards, and then you are putting it in the press bed upside down. And that works, it works great when it works. But when it doesn't work, you usually know right away.
That Tiff. I have not set type, so I don't have that experience, but I resonate with that. You're just thinking about the shape of the words and letters and the white space, and I think yeah, it's really hard for me to finish poems because I'm always fussing with how it looks, and it takes me forever to figure it out. It feels like a puzzle I'm not often can get closure on. So yeah, so I think it's a mysterious, relationship between the space on the page, the visual experience of the poem, and how it looks different when you recently I like to look at my poems on my phone, on a document on my phone, because it looks different and I can see the frame differently, and I'm always trying to figure out how to evaluate them by sending them to myself in different mediums. So I'm sure if I ever learned how to typeset, that would be pretty revelatory too. So it's great to hear about. Thank you for that question, Mary.
I'm just trying to reconcile the trance state with that state, which seems, they just don't seem to play well together. And yet they're equally necessary. Jessica had a lovely question. I'm curious to hear from both of you about what it means to queer language, as Rachel mentioned earlier. How does that intention come through in your work?
Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you, Jessica.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica or Carrie, or both of you for that question.
Yeah, I can jump in and say that, I think about it in a few different ways, and obviously it's not really like a conscious thought, but I think I've tried to kind of think about it myself, just what's my relationship to queerness in my work, and but I feel like I think about it a lot as slant and embracing the weird and the strange, and reclaiming those words. And I have feeling also like I can't fit like a normative narrative pattern, or I can't. To me, I think about it as a tendency towards seeing things in an altered way, I guess, is how I think of it for myself. But I think it's just sort of a feeling or a sensibility that I've ruminated on, I guess. I don't have like a defined sense of it. So I'd love to hear Tess answer that question.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. I think it might, for a long time, I think there was probably, I avoided, or at least I did not probably want, this will be a little bit different from the question, but maybe I'll hopefully in responding, I might get around to answering the question. I have for a long time resisted wanting to be a queer writer or wanting to be identified as such, because I felt like, well, what is that going to be limiting or something? And I think that I had a few kind of personal, like, my more recent identification, well, maybe not so recent, as some of you may know, that I use pronouns they, them, and theirs, and identify as non-binary. And it's not really a new thing, because I've so on a very personal level, have felt this way since I was 5 or 6 years old, when I remember asking my dad, "Are you sure there are only 2 genders? Like, is only boy and girl? Isn't there something else? Because I think that's, and I feel like I'm so grateful that our language is kind of caught up to that, or that we now have words where somebody can, if we do not, fit into a binary heteronormative landscape, that you have other ways of talking about it. And I feel like that's the same with language. And I feel like as a poet, I now feel like so much more freedom to, as Rachel so wonderfully said, like explore that otherness, or what is considered to be strange or weird or just not acceptable, or maybe not spoken about, things that we don't talk about, things that are suppressed. And so that's sort of my long-winded way of getting to that question, Jessica. So hopefully that makes some sense.
I was reading about the Stonewall Inn, and the thing that was remarkable about this, they called them riots, but they were speaking out and they were flamboyant pretty much for the first time, which changed the movement and changed the language of the gay pride movement into something that was visible and viable and impossible to ignore. You know, I think about the cities that the movement rose up in, primarily both on the East Coast and on the West, and it not only changed the language, it changed the city. So that space that the language made created a space in the landscape where people could go. And that both of your books of poems kind of do the same for me. It was so thrilling to really respond and not know exactly why I was feeling that way. I would like to thank both poets. Let's see, make sure there's not another question here at the bottom. If people are, we're going over, which is great, which means we're really engaged. But I would like to thank both of our poets. Just a wonderful reading, really tremendous. I'm going to put in the chat here a link to the program, which also has links to books to buy and also has links to web pages. So you can go and find more work by each of these poets. Also, I'm going to put in the chat a link to our next event, which is the fabulous Tony Mirosevich, who will be speaking with Ploy Firapoki about Tony's new book, Spell Heaven, which really is going to delight both your taste for language, your taste for place, your taste for narrative. It's a remarkable book. Thank you for coming. If I've forgotten to say something, speak up, say it. But please, let's give a round of applause to our poets, and happy Pride Month to everyone listening and present.
Yeah.
I'm looking for my.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so
That's
much.
great.
Wonderful to be here.
Everybody has a wonderful Sunday evening.
Thank you.